Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Callie Waterhouse with the Arizona Association of Realtors, and today we are thrilled to bring you this property management webinar with Mike Mumford. And I got to tell you, I'm super excited. Mike is a three-peat with us. He has done 2 other webinars in the past, all on property management, and today is his 3rd. So we are thrilled to have him. Mike has been involved in property management since 1996 when he joined Bennett Property Management. From 1996 to 2007, he managed upwards of 250 units, handling all of the day-to-day operations. In 2007, he took over as Chief Financial Officer for the Bennett Property Management, overseeing all of the accounting and data entry staff. He became the NARPM Certified Instructor in 2012, and he teaches accounting classes throughout Arizona and other NARPM chapters. That's great. And the CRPM is the Certified Residential Property Management Certification that we offer here at AAR. And you can definitely go on our website and aaronline.com. Just type in CRPM in the search bar and everything you need to know will come up. So Mike, we just did that short intro. Super excited to have you here. Anything you want to add on, or do you just want to jump right in?
Well, the only thing that's changed on my bio is I am actually now the Southwest Regional Vice President for NARPM, covering the 4 corner states in Nevada. So I'm very excited to move up on the board of directors there and serve through that organization. It's a great organization if you're not familiar with it. NARPM is the National Association of Residential Property Managers, and it's a wonderful group that focuses on single-family home fee management. So if you have any interest, shoot me an email. My info is available at the end, and I'd be happy to get you in touch with that.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. And congratulations.
Oh, well, thank you. All right, let's get started. First, I wanted to mention a few resources. We talked about a few of these, but for those of you doing property management full-time, the Department of Real Estate website now has some new information. It's been there for a couple of years, but I don't think a lot of people are accessing it. It's got a full property management audit packet, what to do for all of your trust accounting reconciliations, your 3-way reconciliations, forms that you can use. It also has in the audit packet what you can expect to have when you get the call, when they come to your door and do an audit. So it's got some great information there. The department has been focusing on property management, trying to get information and education out there, in addition to focusing on doing audits and making sure that everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing. So I love that they're doing that they're looking not just to catch people doing it wrong, but also looking to educate and help people do it right. So lots of good stuff there. We talked about NARPM. The other thing with AAR that I should mention is they do have a lot of property management specific forms that are available on zip forms. And if you're a member of AAR, you get those for free. The committee has put together, I think it's around 20 forms, including a lease and a management agreement. Even if you're using your own forms, those are great to look at, a really good resource for perhaps some phrases or some ideas of what you should include in your forms if you are using your own. So I would highly recommend going there, taking a look at those. There may be some forms that you don't have, and don't reinvent the wheel. Go there and take a look at it. So let's get started, and let's talk about the laws regarding property management and maintenance. So first, the big one that covers us is 33-13-24. And I'm not going to go over the whole thing, but number 2, one of the requirements is make all repairs. You have to do whatever is necessary to make it a fit premises. Has to be safe and has to be habitable. And we're going to talk about emergencies and some other stuff, but this goes for everything. You have to do whatever it takes. Number 4, the list that they list there is very important. They have very specific items that you have to maintain. Those tend to be the critical items and time-sensitive items. This is where tenants will, try to call you out and say, my AC's out, you have 2 hours to fix it, that type of thing, and it doesn't actually say that. So this is what it says. There are some remedy sections that we'll look at a little later on, but this is what you're required to do. Continued on that, number 6 is the one that they quote quite often, and it's reasonable heat and air conditioning. reasonable amount of time. That's where this comes from. So you are required to make sure that you're doing repairs in a reasonable amount of time and that you supply a reasonable amount of these services. And there are some pretty severe consequences if you don't, and we'll go over those in just a little bit. One thing that I see landlords do, specifically self-managed landlords, not necessarily property management companies, but a few landlords want this, where they try to make the tenant responsible for the repairs. That is legal. Per the statute, you can do that. Where landlords normally fail and property managers fail is it must be supported by adequate consideration. So if you're going to do that, it must be in writing. Typically, it's in the lease. And typically, the wording would be in consideration of a rent discount of X dollars per month. The tenant agrees to cover the first $50 or $100 of every repair that's done. That's legal. You can do it. That's a business decision. But if you choose to do that, make sure you put it in writing and that all parties agree, and make sure that you cover the consideration in there. And usually that's a rent discount, but that doesn't necessarily have to be that. This would cover anything for, like if you have a home warranty and the home warranty service fee is $65 to make the tenant responsible for the $65. As long as you cover that, you can legally do that with your tenants. The next statute is access. This is pretty typical. You do have to give a written notice of access. Regarding maintenance, this recently changed. If you look at item B, a notice or request from the tenant for maintenance equals permission to enter. They cannot deny you access if they request. So they don't have to give you separate permission to enter if they request maintenance. This comes into play a lot where we see tenant advocacy groups will give you a long list of things that they say are health and safety that you have to fix, perhaps 200 items that you have to fix, and then they deny you access, send you a letter saying, well, you're in breach of the contract because you didn't fix them within the time frame, which is because they didn't allow you access. And so this covers you for that. If they make a request in writing, you do have permission to go in and get it done without a separate permission. You should still notify the tenant. You should let them know when you're coming. But if you can't get a hold of them or they're being difficult about getting access, make sure you get a hold of them, give them proper notice, send them an email, give them a phone call and say, the maintenance man will be there Thursday between this time and this time. They don't have to give you, and you don't have to give them separate access notice for that. So that pretty much covers the legal end of it. I do like to remind people of that. I get quoted the Landlord Tenant Act a lot from either owners or tenants or vendors, and they misquote it on quite a regular basis. So I just kind of wanted to start out and remind everybody of what's in there, what you are actually required to do. It's a good idea to revisit that and make sure when a tenant says you're required to do this within X amount of hours or within 1 day or whatever it is, you should know what that is and just say, no, it doesn't say that. You should actually be able to tell them what it does say. So pay attention to that. In going over my notes for this in the last few classes and questions that I've received, these are kind of the 5 issues that I came up with where people seem to struggle. The unlicensed activity is the first one we're going to cover, and then we'll cover each of those moving forward. The unlicensed assistants and what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do is actually a pretty hot topic for the auditors and the commissioners. We have had a lot of issues with unlicensed people doing things when they're not supposed to be doing things. So what are they allowed to do? ADRE came out with a substantive statement regarding this, 2005.04, and that's available on their website. And this is a list of things that says an unlicensed assistant shall not perform the following activities. And if you look, give instructions to maintenance or repair people. They are not allowed to do that. That has been a big ticket item. That has been an issue across the board. So during audits, investigations, that kind of thing, they're going to be looking for this. So what are they allowed to do? If they're not allowed to give instructions to maintenance people, they're not allowed to do that, what are they allowed to do? They're not allowed to pick the vendor. They shouldn't be choosing between plumber A and B. They shouldn't be deciding whether to repair or replace. Basically anything to do with the money. And that's the big reason there. Dealing with the money is a licensed activity. And part of that, typically the receptionist or somebody else may not know what the owner long-term goals are. If the owner is looking to sell the property within a couple of years, they may want to repair something rather than replace it. If they're looking to move back into the property, they may want to replace the fridge with a really nice fridge, something they won't have to do later. If it comes down to a roofing repair, a roofing replacement, the choice between a 5-year or a 20-year shingle or roofing material is a huge cost difference, and that really depends on what the owner is looking to do. So as far as that goes, you should be contacting the owner. You should have your goals aligned and know what they're doing and what they want as far as that goes. And that's why it requires a real estate license. So once the licensee or the owner has made the decision, then the unlicensed person can perform several clerical duties. They can send faxes out to vendors. They can call tenants to let them know the vendor is coming or who to call to get it scheduled. They can schedule that through the home warranty. A lot of those have on-site systems where they do that. So once the decision has been made, either by the owner or the licensee, the unlicensed assistant can take it on from there. Now, any changes from that, they may call the plumber and say, hey, you go out, you have authority to do up to $300 repairs, whatever it is. And if the plumber calls back and says, oh no, this is a major deal, the main sewage line is collapsed and it's going to be a $1,500 repair, that may be an issue and something that they shouldn't deal with. That goes back to the licensee because it has to do with the money. So let's talk for a second about pre-authorized repairs. Now, some owners in the management agreement will authorize repairs up to a certain dollar amount, and that's an authorized repair. They may also say, my brother's a plumber and he's licensed and bonded and insures, and I want to use the plumber for all of that. I authorize you to use the plumber for all repairs on the property. Those types of authorizations, if there's a repair limit or something pre-authorized by the owner, is something that a non-licensed person would be able to do up to that limit. But you need to be very careful about that. You need to make sure that that a licensee is dealing with any of the money issues that come up. All right, let's talk about emergencies for a second. So I have to tell you, in our company when I was managing property, we had a pager. I know I'm dating myself, 20 years in the business, but we actually had a beeper. And I got paged at 1 o'clock in the morning. And the tenant said, I have an emergency. You have to send pest control over here right now. And I said, okay, I'm still a little foggy, waking up. Said, what's the problem? And she said, I have crickets. And I said, crickets? Yes, crickets. I have a very important meeting in the morning, and these crickets are making me crazy. I can't sleep. You need to send someone over here right now to take care of these crickets. I had to calmly explain to her pest control is not an emergency and not even something that we cover, and hung up the phone. I was very tempted to tell her to get a shoe and squash the cricket, but I was nice and decided not to pour gasoline on the fire. So what is an emergency and isn't an emergency varies drastically. So you need to have policies in place and be prepared for that. And you need to train your tenants. I mean, if your tenant has a gas leak, you should be telling them they need to call 911. They need to call the gas service. If there's a fire at the house, don't call you. Call the fire department. Call 911. That's the right thing to do in a true emergency. The one caveat with that is a flood, and training your tenants to shut the water off, get the damage stopped and mitigated so that they're not causing more damage. Training them where the shutoffs are and that is critical, but you have to train them on the front end. You should either have some type of tenant handbook, tenant packet, tenant training covered in a lease, something on your website telling them, here's what you do for an emergency. Here's what you call. I had a situation, I was talking with another property manager a couple of weeks ago. Tenant had a flood in the house. The water heater had actually started draining from the bottom. The tenant sent the manager multiple emails over the weekend. Their email isn't checked over the weekend. So the manager wasn't even aware of it until Monday morning when they came in. Now, on the website, it directed the tenant to do it. In the lease, it directed the tenant to do it. So it's now a huge deal. but you need to make sure that your tenants do know what they're supposed to do in the event of an emergency. So a real emergency where the house is burned down, there's flood, there's an electrical issue, the water's been shut off, the house has been condemned, that type of thing. The tenant may immediately vacate the property, notify the landlord, and terminate the lease. Typically in a fire situation, in a drastic situation, this is what happens. The tenant needs to live somewhere else. They either get help with the Red Cross or something else, and they move out. The lease is terminated. You need to return the security deposit in full, and you need to return the prorated rent. I've had questions on this before. Well, what if the tenant actually caused the fire? What if they're the ones that did the damage and that? You still need to return the security deposit and the prorated rent. Let the insurance company or the lawyers deal with that after the fact. That's something that you're required by statute to do, so it's a good idea just to follow the statute, let them go, proving that the tenant caused it, proving what the issue was, assigning blame, all of that is probably something you need to let either the authorities do, the owner's insurance company, that kind of thing. In a situation where only part of the house is damaged and part of the house is not habitable, the tenant can choose to stay in the house and pay a diminished rent. It would be fair market value if it's a 3-bedroom and only 1 bedroom was affected and they can't use that 1 bedroom, then you would have to come to an agreement on terms of what's the diminished value of the portion that they can't use. If they can't use the kitchen, if they have 2 bathrooms and they can't use one of the bathrooms, you may need to give them a rent credit and diminish the rent that they owe based on them not being able to use that for that amount of time. So, and that's a choice the tenant has. They may do that in those situations. As far as insurance goes on that, you need to be very careful. Your owner may or may not want to start an insurance claim. So you need to be diligent and know whether you have the authority to do that. In our management agreement, we tell our owners we have that authority to do that. In the AAR management agreement, it does not give you the explicit authority to start an insurance claim. So talk to your owners, find out if they want to start a claim. If their deductible is $10,000 and it's a $12,000 claim, they may choose to just pay it and not have the black mark on the house and have that on the CLUE report. So you need to be sure and work with your owners if you do have a true emergency along with that. So now the thing that we typically deal with is other so-called emergencies. I will say they're time-sensitive repairs. And think back to that list, right? The heating, cooling, hot water, running water, appliances, issues affecting health and safety and essential services. Those are time-sensitive things, and they're critical that we make sure we follow what we're doing and follow the law as far as those go. The list is listed per statute. That's not a get out of jail free. If it's not on a list, it doesn't mean that you don't have to do it. You do. If the roof is leaking, that's not on the list, but you do have to fix it. You can't just let it go, and it has to be fixed within a reasonable amount of time. And that's the general guideline that we have to use is reasonable amount of time. There's no set time on that. There's no, it's got to be 48 hours or 24 hours, or it has to be this or that or the other. The situation varies every time. So if you look at that, a situation where you have a mainline backup in a bathroom, well, if they have another bathroom and that bathroom is usable, that might not be as critical. If they have 2 air conditioners and one of the air conditioners is out, that may not be as critical. If it's a family with very young children or elderly people who may have some health issues, that may be more critical. And of course, the tenants always say they have a newborn infant and grandma staying with them, right? We always get that. The AC's out and you have to get out here because we have this situation. You have to be sensitive to that. You have to pay attention to that and make sure that you're following what you need to do. We understand that the tenant's idea of what's reasonable is not always reasonable, but we do have to be at least willing to work with them and let them know what's happening and get somebody out there as soon as we can. Let's talk about the problems you have if you don't comply. If it's not repaired in a reasonable amount of time, And sometimes you have to order a part, sometimes it's a flood and it's going to just take a few days because of the damage. The tenant may procure reasonable substitute housing. And if they do that, if the situation calls for that, they're allowed to do that, and you have to reduce their rent by that amount. And it's a periodic daily rent. If they get a place at the Ritz or the Carlton or the Hyatt, you don't have to reimburse them for that. The statute says you have to reimburse them their daily rent rate plus 25%, up to 25%. And people struggle with that a little bit. If it's a $1,000 rental, that's $41.67 a day. It's not a whole lot of money. And your owner may choose to reimburse them for more than that. If they go and stay at an extended stay place and it's $60 a day, there's nothing that says that the owner can't say, you know, I'm sorry this has happened, I'm going to bill it back to the insurance anyway, go ahead and reimburse them, that's fine. Or not charge them rent for that period. So that is allowable. You can do that. It depends on whether they've already paid their rent. If they've already paid their rent and you give them a credit back, that's fine. If they haven't paid their rent yet and you issue them a credit for the 25%, that's fine. Just work with your tenants on that and see what you need to do for that. So other consequences, if you don't repair it in a timely manner, the tenant can notify you of breach, give you either a 10-day notice or a 5-day notice for health and safety. And if you don't repair the items within that amount of time, they may legally terminate their lease, recover their full security deposit, any prorated rent, and also possibly other damages. So the consequences are huge. If you get a certified letter from a tenant, make sure that you are on notice. That's the main way that they need to do that. They do need to serve you a legal notice, either in person or via certified mail. And when you get that letter, that's the tenant putting you on notice that they're perhaps going to try to break their lease for breach. We mentioned before these tenant advocacy groups. They will tell the tenants to put a list together of everything from there's paint splatters on a light switch cover to discoloration in the tile to whatever it is. And it's just a laundry list of items. And they say these all have to be repaired within 5 days, their health and safety. And they will play with those dates. They will predate the letter and then send it certified mail a couple of days later, trying to get around the notice period. So you need to know what the laws are and you need to know what the consequences are. And that's where your notice of access. If they send you that letter, you don't need to get a hold of them. You should, but you don't need a separate access notice to get in and fix this stuff. If there's stuff really wrong with the house, get in there and fix it. And if you do get one of those laundry lists of letters or whatever, pass it over to your landlord attorney. They know the language. You would hate to respond to that and respond incorrectly and get yourself in more trouble just by using the wrong words on that. So the consequences are pretty big for not doing essential repairs or any repairs.
Question. What if the home is covered by a home warranty and the company assigned takes days to go out and make the repair?
So that's a really good question, and that does happen on a regular basis, and that may not be reasonable. And it really depends on what your management agreement says. Do you cover home warranties? I know of some property managers who refuse to manage homes that are covered by a home warranty just for that situation. And that's okay. That's a business decision. The owner is not bound to use the home warranty. They want to. They've paid their money for it. They think it's going to be covered in that. So they want to do that, but they may have to pay the tenant a few days worth of rent. They may have to pay for a hotel for a few days to get that covered. Talk to the home warranty company. Just because they've assigned it to one AC vendor doesn't mean they're bound to that one AC vendor. If he says 10 days, call them back. Make the owner call them back. That's okay to do as well. Get the owner involved so the owner can see how difficult sometimes they can be to deal with. There are a few that are good. There are a few that do a really good job. But they're an insurance company and they're trying to get to pay out as little as possible in most situations. So, but make sure your owner is involved and knows, because the consequences really come down to the owner. If that situation comes up and the home warranty company drags their feet, the tenant sends you a 5-day notice for health and safety for getting it repaired, and that time expires, the tenant can legally break their lease, and if that comes as a surprise to your owner, oh my gosh, you're going to be in deep trouble. So make sure you work with your owners. In those situations, our management agreement says, and I've seen several others say the same thing, is that we will try to work with a home warranty company, but if they can't get out in a reasonable amount of time, we will hire somebody else and let you fight with a home warranty company to get that bill reimbursed. So that's just something you can do. I know that's very frustrating. People have that situation. And that's not just with home warranty companies. You may call in an AC repair, then you may have to call 2, 3, 4 different people to get that repair done. If you're going with just whatever the first guy says and going with that and calling it good, you may have some liability there. So definitely something to think about. Good question.
Thank you.
Next, let's talk about tenant self-help. There is a statute in there that if for minor defects, the tenant can do the repairs and deduct it from the rent. As you can see, there's a whole lot of things that they have to do and go through to make this happen. Typically, if they try to do this, it doesn't go well. They don't usually use a licensed contractor. They don't usually give the proper notice and allow for the proper time frames. And this really is part of a business decision. You cannot ask the tenant to waive their rights for self-help. They have the legal authority to do this if they follow the rules. And you cannot ask the tenant to waive any right. If they have a right, you cannot in your lease violate that and say, no, I'm not going to abide by this statute. You have to let them try to do that. So where this becomes a business decision is, do you let tenants do minor repairs? Do you let them, if the garage door opener stops or the remote stops working, do you let them buy a new remote and reimburse them for that? If the mail key gets bent or lost, do you let them get a new mail key and reimburse them for that? Or maybe you don't reimburse for mail keys. But for minor things like that, that's a business decision. That's something you can choose to do. There is some liability there for tenant help or tenant doing repairs, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But as far as tenant doing repairs themselves for an emergency situation or to get a reasonable situation, in some situations they are allowed to do that. So you just need to be aware of it. Let's talk for a second about an unsecured property. Perhaps there was a fire and the fireman broke down the front door. Perhaps somebody broke in. Perhaps, who knows, somebody, broke a window, lost a key, did whatever. There are some legal implications here, especially with changing locks, securing the property, boarding up the doors, that type of thing. You do have, and the owner does have some obligations and liability there. I don't know if everybody followed the news story from July of last year. A tenant in a property had given a spare key to her boyfriend. They broke up. She filed a restraining order against him, called the landlord and said to the property management company, please rekey my locks. Before that could get done, the ex-boyfriend went into the house, waited for her, and killed her. Now, it was a very quick amount of time, but I can tell you if it had been 2, 3, 4 days and the landlord had chosen not to change the locks, had chosen not to secure the property or to act on that, there could be some pretty serious consequences. And if the tenant sues, they're going to sue you. They're not going to sue the owner. They've paid their rent to you. They signed a lease with you. They come to your office. They call you for repairs. That's the first person who's going to get sued. Now, we all know that when we get sued, we can have that suit transferred to the owner or thrown out because they're not suing the right party. But that doesn't stop the tenant from calling 3 on your side. That doesn't stop the tenant from going to Yelp. That doesn't stop the cameras there with your sign in the front yard displaying that, this property management company or this landlord didn't do the right thing. We all remember in San Bernardino when they went to the apartment and it had police tape around it, and the landlord let all of the media in there. Oh my gosh, it was a huge deal. So for an unsecured property, please make sure that you're doing what you need to do. There are some situations where you just need to get it done and bill the tenant back. Then that's just the best way to handle it, especially in domestic violence. I can't reiterate that enough. That's a real big deal. So as far as emergency repairs and repairs go, just make sure that you're working with the tenants. Make sure that you're not just accepting whatever your vendor says. We're all busy, but we do need to pay attention to it. It is a fiduciary responsibility to the owner because of the consequences. If the tenant terminates their lease because of your inaction or your lack of action or your lack of follow-through, that liability may come back to you, and the owner may be able to sue you for lost rents, to be made whole and all of that. So not worth messing with it. Keep your owner in the loop and make sure you're doing what you need to do. So now let's talk about the money. Did you think about how you were going to pay for it when you ordered the repair? Did you think, how much money do I have in the bank for this particular owner when I ordered the $1,000 compressor to be replaced, or I had the building sealed up, or I stopped the flood, or whatever? It's definitely something you need to think about, and definitely something you should have a company policy in place for. But some of these issues are business decisions. You can decide to order the work without money on hand. That's a business decision. You can do that. You can't necessarily pay the bill. So there are rules about commingling and having money on hand before you actually write checks. But you need to have a policy in place and make sure you're covered. You do need to think about the money because it's important. The money violations will get you shut down by the department faster than just about anything else. So commingling and paying bills when you don't have money, using other people's money is really bad. Don't do it. Let's talk about owner funds and owner reserves. Again, business practice, you are not required to have an owner reserve. You are not required to have a maintenance reserve. Most companies do. Most companies have a repair limit, and they have a reserve that's close to the repair limit. It just makes sense. If you have a repair limit of $27 and a reserve of $27, you can pay any bill that comes in under that repair limit. That just makes sense. Having a reserve on hand is a good business decision in my opinion, and it allows you to do these things much faster than you would be able to if you didn't have a reserve on hand. Now, one caveat for that, the department does say that money has to be used for the purpose in which it was given to you. So if an owner sends you a check and says this $1,000 is for the AC repair, you cannot use that money for anything other than the AC repair. If the owner has other bills, if the owner owes you money, you cannot use that money to pay yourself. You have to use it for the intended purpose. Now, most people cover this in their management agreement. I looked up the AR, and the list is pretty long. It says that the owner reserves at the end of the month from tenants' deposits can be used for fees, bills, other amounts due, commissions, broker compensation, other operating expenses, fund required to maintain the reserve. There's a long list in there. Then it also says that you don't need permission for ongoing expenses like a monthly HOA bill or a pool bill, that type of thing. So make sure your PMA, if you're not using AR PMA, make sure that your PMA does cover that and that you know what you're supposed to be or what you're allowed to do. Because if they send you money for one thing, you have to use it for that thing, period. So ordering work versus paying invoices. If the water heater blows up and you know it's going to be $1,000, ordering that work is fine, even if you only have $200 on hand. Ordering the work is one thing, paying the invoice is another thing. So a couple of things on that. Make sure that your vendors understand that you are ordering work on behalf of the owner. You're not personally ordering the work. You're ordering it on behalf of the owner. The vendor's bill should actually come in the owner's name, care of the management agreement, or excuse me, the management company, so that the vendor is clear that if there's a problem and the money doesn't happen to come in, they know who to go after. They have the ability to put mechanics liens, and they have other ways to cover themselves for non-payment of bills that you don't have as a management company. So ordering work is one thing, paying the bill is another. Now, you might be tempted to pay the invoice when the owner doesn't have enough funds. At best, it's an unauthorized loan. At worst, it's illegal commingling. So people say, well, I have a certain amount of money in the trust account of the company money. You're allowed to keep up to $3,000 of your money in the trust account. That's not considered commingling. That's allowed to have it on there to keep the account open. if you pay an owner bill and draw his account negative, if you don't physically write the check or move the money into that ledger, you're not covering yourself. Just having your money in your ledger does not fix the situation. That's gonna draw that one owner negative, and that's not okay. If you're gonna loan the owner money, write him a check. Write him a check, put an invoice in, and get paid back when he sends you the money. That's a business decision, but you need to make sure if you're gonna loan people money, what are the terms? How often do they have to pay you back? What's the interest? When's it due? What are the legal requirements for issuing loans? I don't know. I'm not a loan company, but I know there's lots of legal requirements out there. So if you choose to do that as a business decision, make sure you get it in writing and you get yourself covered for that. Otherwise, the owner may say, I'm canceling management tomorrow and I'm not paying you back. What's your recourse on that? It's a loan. There's not a lot of recourse. And we don't want to be in court fighting over the money. So, and nowadays, getting money from an owner can take just a few hours. You can go online, they can pay via credit card, they can do whatever they need to do. So don't mess with that. Make sure that you're following your legal requirements on that. And I get the question all the time about security deposits. Well, we'll just dip into the security deposits to pay this bill. That's absolutely illegal. The security deposits are the tenant's money. The owner cannot use those to pay bills until the tenant defaults in some way. That money is theirs. And if you have owners who question you on this, send them to the department website and look under FAQs, the frequently asked questions, because it's covered in there. The department has your back on that. I actually have that link saved as a draft, and I fire it off often because owners do say, well, wait a second, that's my money. No, it's not your money. It's the tenant's money. So I know it's tempting, but don't do that. Don't dip into the deposit to pay owner bills. It's not their money. Now, what happens if an owner is unable or unwilling to provide? What do? How do you handle it? What's your management agreement say? Do you cover in your management agreement this situation? Do you give the owners a time frame, let's say 5 days? If you request funds and they don't provide it within 5 days, the management agreement cancels? Do you have some wording like that? What do you say to your vendors? What do you say to your tenants? I mean, again, the tenant's going to sue you. They're going to come after you. And if you look at the code of ethics, any code of ethics, they all say you have a duty to protect your customers. And your tenants are your customers. The owner is the client, but your tenant is your customer. You have a duty to protect and treat the public fairly. And so make sure that you aren't working for an owner who says, I'm just not going to pay any repairs. I'm not going to paint. I'm not going to clean up the asbestos. I want you to, take some bleach down and spray it on the mold and we're all good. You don't want to work for anybody and put yourself in a slumlord situation. It's important that you make sure you cover this ahead of time. Make sure you cover it in your management agreement. Make sure you cover it with your vendors. Let people know. And if it goes south and you have to cancel, make sure to let the tenant know exactly what's going on. If you do cancel management agreement, you should be notifying your tenants where the deposit's going, who to pay rent to, all of those things anyway. So if you do have owners in that, our management agreement says we have the ability and the right to cancel it within 3 days if we don't have funds. Just something to think about. Again, business decision, but you should definitely think about that ahead of time so you're ready. Now let's think about quality repairs too. I've had owners in the past say, well, I know it was a hoarder situation and we have a whole lot of hauling to do. You have a truck, just drive down to the corner and grab some guys off the corner and have them loaded up and haul it to the dump. That's not okay. What's your policy? What do? Do you only use licensed, bonded, insured vendors? Insured for sure. There's some huge liabilities there. Licensed, bonded? Maybe, maybe not. Depends on the situation. Workers' comp. Do you require that they have workman's comp? You absolutely should. If you hire a vendor that does not have workman's comp insurance, you do realize that the workman comp liability falls back on your policy. I've seen property management companies hire non-workers comp covered vendors before and receive bills for $30,000 because all the work that those vendors are doing, now some of them had it and some of them didn't, but if you don't have the policy and you're not tracking it, you don't have waivers on file, If your workman's comp company comes and audits you, or your general liability company comes and audits you, you may be liable to cover them under your policy. That jumps your policy premium way up. So definitely something to think about. And also, what about the liability? If you use a handyman instead of a plumber and the work is not done properly and there's, God forbid, some damage or harm to the tenant, you really need to think about that. You need to think about, when do you use somebody that's licensed and not. Also, what about occupied units? Who do you send to occupied units? How do you make sure that the people you're sending to occupied units are actually honest, good people? How do you let your tenants know? What about access? Do you give keys out to tenants or to vendors? These are all things you need to think about, and have that all together, and have a policy, have a written policy. You know, if it's a light switch, send a handyman. That's okay. But if there's a problem with the breaker box, send the electrician. Anything that may require permits, anything that may have some other safety implications, make sure you're using licensed people. And make sure your owner knows what you're doing too. Your owner, you may be using a handyman, and your owner may be thinking that you're doing, that you're hiring only licensed people, and they may be surprised. So make sure you cover that with that. What about owners doing repairs? All of the same things still apply. Your owner doesn't have a license. He doesn't have insurance as a handyman. If he breaks a pipe and floods the house, there may be some consequences there. Now, you may choose to do that or let the owner do that while it's vacant. You may not. That's a business decision. You can allow owners to do work. They own it. They can absolutely work on their own property. But that may be something you say, Mr. Owner, if you choose to do that, I choose not to work for you. That's okay. It's a business decision, and some of that may depend on the owner, but you should have a policy. In those situations, especially on occupied units, you may end up co-managing the property, and that's not something you want to do. If the owner's over there all the time doing the pool service or the lawn or fixing things, starting conversations with tenants, that's not something you want to get involved in. The tenant's going to say, oh, boo-hoo, the late fees I got on the owners. Oh, no problem, we'll waive the late fees. Well, the owner doesn't care if he's not getting them. If he's getting them, he may care. But if the late fees go to you, or some of the late fees go to you, he may not care about waiving your fees. No sweat off his back. So just something to think about. Make sure that if you do allow owners to do repairs, owners typically don't know about access rules. They don't know that you have to give 48 hours written notice for access. They don't know that you have to notify the tenants in certain ways. I've heard of situations where owners are just, oh, my dad's an AC guy, give the dad the key, the dad goes over, just walks in the property, doesn't even knock on the door. So if you're going to let them do this, make sure you have a written policy of what they can do and what they can't do.
That's great. Yeah, Mike, let's ask everybody that's on the webinar today, do you allow your owners to make repairs on their own properties?
Right.
So we're saying maybe not such a great idea, but we know that people do it. So anybody, do you allow your owners to make their own repairs? Ooh, we have a whole lot of no's.
Good.
We're about 100% no.
Okay. It becomes difficult, and occasionally you have an owner where a property will come vacant and the owner will say, oh my gosh, it's, $1,500 to get it rent ready, to clean it and paint it. I'll do it myself. And part of what we do is training the owners to say, look, I can have a vendor and a crew go in there and get this done in 2 days. You can do this on the evenings and weekends and take 2 weeks. What's your lost rent cost to you? Remind them of that. I know a property manager in Texas who, when an owner says the rent comps come back at $1,300, and the owner says, I want you to put it on the market at $1,450. And so they'll do the math and they'll send the owner a text every day of a $50 bill. Here's how much rent you lost today. Here's how much rent you lost today, until the owner finally gets it and comes back around. Because unless it's in their face and they see that, they're not thinking of the long term. If you can get it turned quickly and get it back on the market, that's the best for everybody. So, and repairs on occupied units is difficult in some situations, so you just need to be aware of that. All right.
Do you think there are ever any extenuating circumstances, like maybe if you live in a small town, quick in, quick out? Is there an exception
There is,
to that?
and it really depends on the owner. I know of some owners who do that, and in most cases, the owners will not disclose that they're the owner. I'm here to do the repair. My name's Bob. That's how they handle that. And in those situations, if the owner is qualified to do the work and does a good job, something else you need to think about. I think on a case-by-case basis, there are a few situations where that's okay. For the most part, the owners don't have time to do it. They don't know what they're doing. They don't know the legal consequences. And so training them in all of those things kind of outweighs the $50 they're going to save by not sending a handyman out. Tenants doing repairs, same thing. Do you allow it? Let's think about yard care. Most of our leases say the tenant is responsible for yard care. Okay, so they got to mow the grass or pick the weeds out of the rocks. Well, that's fine. What about trimming the shrubs? Well, okay, that's probably okay. What about the 50-foot palm tree? It's in the yard. It's part of yard care. Do you expect them to do it? Do you allow them to do it? And how do you train your tenants? How do you let them know what to expect and what not to expect? How do you let them know, for instance, in yard care, this HOA is really, really picky. If you have a weed that's over an inch tall, they will fine you for it. You need to let your tenants know what the expectations are and what aren't. And there is some liability there. Think about pool care, think about other things. If you pass the responsibility for pool care onto a tenant and the tenant doesn't know what they're doing and they cause an issue that burns out the motor, the owner could have that $15,000, $20,000 investment of a pool ruined, damaged, needing thousands of dollars in repair to save $100 a month. Gosh, don't know on that one. So it's something you need to think about. It's a business decision again, but there is some liability to the owner. We talked about tenant doing repairs. In the situations where a tenant is responsible to do the first X dollar of repairs, sometimes what happens is the tenant says, well, I'm not paying that money. I'll just deal with the fact that that switch doesn't work. No, it's a double sink. I don't use the left sink anyway. I'll just let it stay clogged. It doesn't bother me. I'll just use the other one. You end up with a lot of deferred maintenance. So you have issues. So it's something to think about. It's a business decision. Again, you can let tenants do repairs. You can let them do some minor repairs. But are you checking on them? Are you making sure they're doing good quality work? What are you doing as far as that goes? So definitely something to think about. And make sure they know what to expect and what they're allowed to do and not allowed to do. Let's talk for a minute about tenant-caused damages. All of these, HOA fines, damaged flooring, non-reported repairs, bed bugs, everything, other infestations. The list goes on and on and on, and I'm sure we could poll you and sit here for 6 hours about things that tenants have done. But it's things that you need to think about. Again, there's some liability to the owner. There's some liability as far as the premises go. For a lot of people, a rental house is the biggest investment that they've made. It's not $1,000 in rent a month. It's a $250,000 or $300,000 or $500,000 investment that they've made. And if the deferred maintenance and issues go on with that house, that brings the value down, and that's not okay. So you need to be thinking about these things. One way to handle it is to force the tenant to fix the window, to fix the damaged flooring, to fix those things. Another way to deal with it is to fix them and bill the tenant back. That's okay. But you need to think about that and be consistent when you do that with tenants. You should have a policy and you should make sure that you follow it, because if you require one tenant to fix a broken window and another tenant you fix the window for them, and one happens to be a protected class and the other one isn't, oh gosh, now we're talking fair housing stuff. So you should have a consistent policy and follow it. Make sure that you have that in writing. Make sure your tenants know what to expect. The other thing on this too, your vendors should be your eyes and ears. Your vendors are out at the property. When you go to do a walkthrough of the property, they will send the dogs to the neighbor's house to be dog sit for the day. They will put away the drug paraphernalia. They will put those things away and be on their best behavior when you come to do a walkthrough. But when the maintenance guy comes to do a walkthrough, they don't do any of that stuff. They're so excited to get him over there to fix the garbage disposal or whatever else it is. So talk to your vendors and say, if you notice more than 6 dogs at the property, please tell me. If you notice that they have scales and bags and all kinds of drug paraphernalia around, please let me know. So they can be your eyes and ears. They're also there to let you know when it is tenant-caused damage. If they go and roto-rooter the drain or the sink or whatever and pull a child's toy out or a diaper or a washcloth, they should be writing that on their invoices to you and being your eyes and ears and letting you know. It's much easier for you to go back to the tenant to say, well, this is what the guy found. Here's the picture. Picture's worth 1,000 words. Have them do that stuff for you and make sure that you're having them, since they're at the property anyway, be your eyes and ears. Just good business practice. We kind of talked about this, requiring tenants to do that, inferior work, deferred maintenance. Something you need to think about. It's a business decision, and you can go either way on that. Probably depends on the class of property, the class of tenants, where it's at, how new the home is, how old the home is. If it's in the historic district, it may be something very difficult for a tenant to repair. So definitely something you need to think about, and make sure you have a policy and you're consistent with that. And that's all that I had. I'm open up for questions if anybody has any questions, concerns, anything else.
John shared that his lease states that the tenant is responsible for yard care as long as they can reach it while standing on the ground.
Okay, good. I've seen that one. That's a great way to put it. It's very clear. I've seen it before where as long as they don't have to hold any type of device over their head, like a chainsaw or trimmers over their head, so that something's not going to fall on them. So, but as long as they're standing on the ground, that's great. That's a good way to put it, and that's fairly clear and something easy to be consistent with. So, great.
So one of the questions, going back to what you just said about having your vendor being the eyes and ears, if you were to have a vendor send you the picture of the drug paraphernalia in the house, and then you want to go as the owner's representative and check it out, 48-hour notice?
You do have to give a 48-hour notice. I do have a better suggestion for you on that. A lot of the police departments in the area will do what's called a knock and talk. And if you contact the police and say, look, I'm suspicious, there's lots of traffic in and out, there's, whatever, they will send a uniformed officer in a squad car to the front door and knock on the front door in the afternoon to talk to them. One of two things is going to happen. One, the vendor was wrong, or it's the tenant will get scared and clean it up. Or if they are really doing something wrong, starting a meth lab, doing a grow house, doing anything like that, the tenant's going to vacate. They're going to leave. And either way, the problem is solved. But you need to be careful about your own safety and a liability there when you think about that. Going to do a walkthrough of a house, you definitely have to give the tenant notice. You can't just show up. Think about that, and think about your safety when you're doing that, when you're doing any walkthroughs. Another way to handle that is if you go deliver any other kind of notice and knock on the tenant's door and they allow you to come in, they don't think about it. I used to knock on the door, and if we used to serve notices, and the tenant would say, hey, wait, my sink leaks. And I'd say, oh, let me grab a wrench, I'll come in. I'm not a plumber, I'm not going to fix it, but they let me in to look at it. So now I can tell the vendor exactly what it is and what's going on, and I get good eyes and ears in the house. If they allow you to come in, that's okay. So there's different ways to deal with that. But as far as doing an actual walkthrough, has to be hand-delivered notice or certified mail. And, if the tenant's not doing anything wrong and you walk up to the door and knock on it and hand-deliver a notice in the evening, sometimes the tenants will say, why don't you just get it over with now instead of coming back 3 days from now and go get it done. So if they don't and they rifle at that and they don't want to let you in, there may be something going on. There may not. It may just be they don't want you coming in and feel like their rights are being stepped on, and so that's okay.
While you're inside the property, okay to take pictures?
Yeah, that's a tough one. Depends on what you're doing with the pictures. So I would say you want to take pictures by exception only, and make sure to be very cautious of taking any pictures of the tenant's possessions. I've seen issues before where marketing photos will show tenants' furniture, tenants' bureaus with the jewelry on top, and that's an invitation for crime right there. So it is always best to make sure. Now, if there's a problem and you're doing a walkthrough and you want to show the owner the peeling paint, the water stain in the ceiling, the stain in the carpet, Absolutely. You had a new tub put in and the owner wants pictures of it? Absolutely, you can do that. Just be careful with any of the tenant's possessions.
If people want to reach you via email is best?
Email is best. I'm rarely at my office like now, out and about doing things. So shoot me an email. Let me know who you are and that you were on a webinar with me, so I kind of have a idea of where you came from, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
I know that your forte really is trust accounting, and you are the go-to guy for audits and getting your records in order. Mike did a fabulous webinar with us on trust accounting back almost a year ago, and that's available on our website. Michelle says, I know it depends on the situation, but in general, what is a reasonable time for an AC repair? Like during the summer in Arizona, what is reasonable?
It really depends on the situation. A few days is probably reasonable. Anything more than 4, 5, 6 days is not going to be reasonable. And you need to be aware of your city situations too. I recently found out that the city of Phoenix says that an AC should cool the house down to at least 82 degrees. So if you have an older AC and it's working, but it's not cooling the house down to 82 degrees, the tenant may be able to say it's not working well enough and it's not reasonable. So make sure you check with each of your cities on that stuff too. And I think if you're working with the tenants and letting them know, and you're calling multiple people, you don't just have one AC guy and call the one AC guy, and if he's busy, that's it. Your goal is to be able to stand up in front of the judge 2 months from now when the lawsuit all comes down and have a clear conscience and say, I did what I could do. And if you go with that gut and go with that guideline, you're probably going to be okay.
Folks, thank you so much for joining us today. I want to remind you that our next webinar coming up in just a couple of weeks, we have a series that we're going to do. It's a Tuesday, Thursday, August 16th and 18th, and we're going to talk about solar. On Tuesday the 16th, we're going to talk about what every realtor and buyer need to know about solar, and then on Thursday we're going to talk about what every realtor and seller need to know about solar, and all of the laws and the HOA stuff, and the top 5 everything about solar. So this is going to be incredible. All of our upcoming webinars are available on our website, so you can go on and register at aaronline.com/calendar. And as always, today's webinar has been recorded and will be available on our website. You can go to aaronline.com, just type in webinar in the search feature and it'll come up, or you can visit our bit.ly, which is bit.ly/AAR webinars. And thank you, Mike, so much for joining us today. Any closing remarks?
No, thank you all. Hopefully you guys gained something from this. And like I said, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer. And I commend everybody for trying to get educated and doing it right. It brings up the bar for our whole industry, and that is awesome. That's what we need. So
that's what we need. Absolutely.
Great.
Well, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Be safe out there and have a great day.